Hey guys, I am super excited. I just got this sourdough starter that is 91 years old. So it is from 1929 from a bakery in Germany. So how I got my hands on this little thing of beauty here, and I'm super excited. I hope I don't mess it up as we go about getting it reconstituted. But one of my members inside the Pioneering Today Academy, her name is Monica, sent me a letter and said that she had some of this dried sourdough starter that came from Germany, from where her father was from. Specifically, forgive me, I don't know how to pronounce or speak German, but I think it's pronounced Lohne Germany. It's a township, and it's a bakery there, and they've been tracing back, and they think that it came from 1929, but it may even possibly be older, but that's as far back as they've been able to trace it. And she said it has a really unique flavor, and it's very, very active, and the way that they use it is they make it up at night because it's a bakery, right? And then they bake their bread with it in the morning. So I am super, super excited because she sent me a small amount of this treasure to try. Now, even if you don't have this really old 91-year-old sourdough starter, you can still use these tips for any type of dehydrated sourdough starter that you need to be able to rehydrate to obviously make your sourdough products with. So we're gonna go ahead and cut this baby open. Now, I did have this in the freezer because when she sent it to me, I knew that I wanted to share it with you guys on camera and in a video. So I put it in the freezer and I just pulled it out this morning. So if you have dehydrated sourdough starter and you're not ready to reconstitute it, put it in the fridge or the freezer. Don't just leave it sitting out at room temperature if possible. So this is 3 tablespoons of starter, and we're gonna go ahead. You can see it's kind of powdery and it's kind of clumpy as well. So it's kind of, I mean, it'll break in your fingers, but it's kind of clumpy. Oh my gosh, I can smell it, you guys. I know this sounds weird and you can't smell it on camera, but it totally smells really, really good in like a good yeasty sourdough way. Okay, I'm super excited. It's official. So we're gonna go ahead and put this in here. She said to do all of it. And then we're gonna start with about 3/4 cup of water. And you wanna use warm water, that's gonna help activate it faster. And then I'm just gonna kind of stir this a little bit. I'm gonna let it set for a few minutes so that it can kind of dissolve because I don't want clumps of this sourdough starter in the water. I need it to be dissolved before I add the flour. So it's gonna take a little bit for that to soften up and to reconstitute. So we're just gonna let that sit. And in the meantime, we are going to grind our flour because we need to feed it with flour and with water. And I'm gonna use my hard white wheat. I don't actually have any rye, though rye is a great thing to add to a sourdough starter, especially in the beginning. It has a lot of, can help it really bounce up, and rye has a great flavor if you like the strongness of rye. I do, the rest of my family, not so much, so we're gonna stick with the hard white wheat, but don't worry, if you don't have a grain mill and you're not grinding your own flour, I have to admit, I almost used some of my store-bought organic, unbleached, all-purpose flour, but then I thought, this is a 91-year-old starter. I really need to use some fresh ground flour with this baby. It's getting special care. So we're gonna go ahead and grind up a cup of these hard white organic wheat berries. Okay, so it's been a couple of minutes and I used the whisk just to get any of those little extra clumps, and I'm just gonna kind of fill right in the sides of the jar there. Yeah, and there's no more clumps left, so all of that is completely dissolved in the water. So now it's time to add our flour. So for this amount, with the 3 tablespoons of the starter, 3/4 cup of water to begin with. It said to add a cup of flour. And we want to keep it on the thick side. Her instructions were very clear that this should be reconstituted thickly, not thin. So I'm just going to start to incorporate that flour first. So this would obviously be much too thin because that's pretty runny. But I find it easier if you stir in some of the flour first rather than dump it all in and then try to incorporate it. So when you're doing it on the thicker side, which is how I normally keep my sourdough starter anyway, if you've watched that video on how to make a sourdough starter from scratch, if you don't have a dehydrated starter to begin with, you'll see that I like to keep mine on the thick side regardless, but you want to make sure when it is on this thicker side that you are incorporating all of the flour. We don't want any clumps of dry flour in the starter. And you want to make sure you scrape the sides and around the bottom. All right, I am not going to add in the reserve 1/4 cup of water. We're just going to keep this with that 3/4 cup. When you're using fresh ground flour, it does absorb water differently than regular flour, and so this will actually get thicker in about 15 minutes. We'll come back and we'll see that the fresh ground flour has absorbed some of the liquid. So I may decide to add some more water at that time, but this is actually, I would like it to be a little bit thicker, but I think once it has that rest time that we'll reach that. So we'll come back and check this in about 15 minutes and you'll be able to see how much of the moisture that this fresh ground flour has actually absorbed in that amount of time. And then I think it will be at the perfect consistency. Okay guys, so it's been actually about 20 minutes, so I don't know if you can see there, but this has absorbed the excess water. So this is now actually really thick. So you can see is like, this is not moving. So you don't want it to be like a dough ball, like, you know, bread dough or something that would hold and be that thick. But this is, it's pretty thick. And you can see this is like a stiff, kind of goopy, but pretty stiff. So this is what we're after. So now we need to let this sit at room temperature. I'm going to put this on there. This is not airtight. You do want it to be able to breathe. But I'm going to put this on here just to avoid, you know, we do live on a homestead and a farm, and occasionally flies get in the house, and I don't want them getting into this. So we're just going to keep dust or anything off of that. So I'm just not going to tighten that all the way and set it on there. So we're going to let this go for 8 to 12 hours, and then we're going to come back and check and see if it is activating and growing. So hopefully we'll see a lot of bubbles and we'll actually see it rising up the sides of the jar. So I'll meet you back here.
Here we are just 8 hours later. It has more than doubled, and look at the amount of bubble action we have on this starter. I decided to use the artisan sourdough bread recipe I have in my Sourdough Mastery e-course, and this has been proofing in the fridge for almost a full 24 hours. I have never worked with a starter that has been this active, and when you see the rise that we get when this comes out of the oven from the cut lines, it's amazing. I have started multiple starters in filming of my different sourdough courses and testing them. I have never had a starter with this unique flavor profile before. Even though it proofed for over 24 hours, it wasn't super sour, but it had a definite pungency to it and really notes of like a well-aged Parmesan. It almost had a cheesy flavor in the best way possible that I've never experienced from any other sourdough bread before. I still haven't found a way to make cutting through sourdough bread when it has that nice, crispy, chewy outer crust and super soft center easy on camera, but wait for the crumb shot. Wait for it. There it is.
So now that I have my newly dehydrated and reconstituted sourdough starter that is 91 years old, I can't wait to make some sourdough bread with it to see the difference in the taste and how it reacts. And I will be using my favorite sourdough sandwich bread, which you can go and watch this video and snag that recipe if you don't have it already.